Thanks a lot for having me here. You probably think this is a bit out of left field, Accident Investigation Electrical Engineering Conference. But I did present this at the Mechanical Engineering Safety Seminar, and they seemed to enjoy it, but I thought I'd add a bit of electrical to this one for you guys, because I'm sure you'll be able to understand it. Not that they wouldn't have. All right, so I'm going to do an accident investigation, Sydney Seaplanes. Some of you may have heard of it, but first of all, I'm going to touch on black boxes or flight recorders, because that's the area I usually work in. So for those of you who don't know, Australian Transport Safety Bureau is the National Transport Safety Investigator for rail, road and aviation, but aviation is our main business. And these are flight recorders, if you've never seen them before, black boxes which are orange. So in RPT aircraft, and the accident I'm going to talk about is a charter operation, which didn't have these recorders fitted, but for regular public transport, the 737s and the A320s that you fly around Australia and go overseas in, 777s, these all have mandatory flight recorders. One of them is a cockpit voice recorder. The next one's a flight data recorder, and they're commonly called black boxes. That's what you hear in the news, that they're looking for the black boxes. But there's also combination recorders. In the modern aircraft, the 787s, they have an enhanced aviation flight recorder that has both voice and data, and but for redundancy they have two of those, one fitted in the front and one fitted in the rear. Also fitted on aircraft are quick access recorders which aren't crash protected, but we get data from those wirelessly when aircraft, Qantas pull into Sydney or Virgin pull into Melbourne, an engineering station that's automatically downloaded. So that's generally the same data as what's on the flight data recorder, but doesn't include the voice. And other recorders for condition monitoring with different parameters. This is a typical black box or the flight data recorder. It has a chassis and a CSMU, which is a crash survivable memory unit. And that's made, the crash survivable, Crash survivable memory unit is made of titanium or stainless steel, and that's the only bit we're interested in an accident. That's where the memory of the flight data, the last 25 to 50 hours of flight, is recorded on that CSMU, and it needs a chassis to drive it that's plugged into the aircraft's power system. On the front is a ULB, an underwater locator beacon, which lasts for 90 days. When that's submerged in water, it emits a 37.5 kilohertz signal that can be detected with the specialist equipment underwater. So there's a few variations in the voice recorder. The current standard is for 2 hours, which you might think, oh, that's not very long really, 2 hours, but that originated from pilots' union not wanting their workplace recorded. Of course, things have changed nowadays, everything's recorded, but the pilots didn't want to be checked out in normal operations and to be reprimanded or lose their job or whatever. They really put up a bit of a fight to only have 2 hours, so it recorded the pertinent information in the event of an accident only. It was only 30 minutes up to a couple of years ago. Now 2 hours, and now increased to match the FDR, 25 hours. So times are changing. They do have an independent power supply on them. So in the event of an accident where the power supply is lost to the aircraft, they run for an extra 10 minutes. It's called a RIPS. And the two recorders, the two black boxes, This one's a combi. What's that one, actually? Yeah, that's that combi recorder I was talking about on the 787. But the voice recorders start as soon as power's applied to the aircraft, and not until power's shut off the aircraft. That causes a bit of a problem to us. If we have an incident we think is worth reporting, if they put it into maintenance and put power on the aircraft, then we start hearing the maintenance personnel talking, which is really not much use to us. But you do hear some good stories. About us as well. Okay, so we have to be a bit careful actually, because it's a bit embarrassing if we get it into our workshop and we apply power to it incorrectly and then we record ourselves talking. It's not very good. So these are the different types of, they're all voice recorders, those ones. Different manufacturers. Fortunately, there's not too many, but we have to hold the OEM's equipment to be able to download them. Allied Signal, L3, different names. And there's the one on the left is the 787 GE 25 hours enhanced recorder for both voice and data, and various little shapes and various configurations that we need to be able to download. And I thought I'd just throw one in on the Boeing 777, which is, some of you may know, it's a famous flight that we're looking for, MH370. So that's the two flight recorders we want to get out of MH370. Unfortunately, it's at 4,000 to 5,000 metres. Anyone knows where it is, please tell us. But access to those recorders is in the roof of the aircraft, and you can see a few people ask me, oh, well, if you know the events surrounding that, we think it was the pilot that did it. Was this on video? But did the pilot or somebody manage to turn the recorders off? Well, they would need a ladder to get into the roof to turn the recorders off, or circuit breakers which aren't accessible. So we're hoping when we do find MH370, or Malaysia finds MH370, that there'll be something on those recorders. The last 2 hours, certainly not the whole flight, but it will tell us something. But 25 hours worth of flight data. Just to show you inside a crash-protected, crash-survivable memory unit, this one's called. There's the statistics or the specifications of what it's meant to withstand. You can see deep sea pressure, 20,000 feet, and seawater immersion. So inside the housing, which is steel or titanium armour, there's two thermal blocks for fire protection, and it depends, I think we've got it there, it depends whether it's a high temperature fire or a low temperature fire, how long it can survive for. So what we're really interested in is the flash memory ICs in the middle, and so if we get a damaged flight recorder, which is really a black box, which I'll show you next, then we have to get that memory card out and replay it a certain way. And this leads into the next presentation, how we do a sort of transplant to read that recorder. Anyone heard of this accident before? This is 737, it happened in Western Australia 2 years ago during firefighting operations. So the acronym's large air tanker collision with terrain. And you can see to the left there's the remnants of a bushfire that was burning underneath the aircraft, and the aircraft with that jet blast was on its second run. It already put spray on that area that's extinguished, and was doing the second run up a ridge line, and 737, same that's used for passenger operations, but this one's been converted, and carries a lot of fire retardant, and yeah, happened like quite remote, long way from firefighting, apart from its own equipment, and it did the approach. From the flight record, did the approach too low, obviously, but also without allowing enough room for enough space for the engines to power up and climb it out of the valley, and it clipped the top of the ridge, and fortunately it pitched up, and they're already in a bit of difficulty, but the tail clipped, and both pilots survived this, which is pretty amazing. With 737 you don't get many surviving, but it was full of fuel as well as retardant. The retardant didn't burn, but the fuel did. So the aircraft ended up like that, not much left. So then when you get the flight recorders, you get the cockpit voice recorder. That's before we disassembled it. It was the fire was never extinguished. It was just left to burn out naturally. So we had over that 25 hours low temperature fire. We had a high temperature fire as well, but so you can see the crash survivable memory unit still intact. That's the flight data recorder. We've lost all the chassis, but there's the flight data. And on the left-hand side is the way we download a recorder where the memory board is still intact. We did have to do some soldering and repairs to that memory board because it did get damaged because it was above that specification. But we use a donor recorder that we have in our lab, so we have a stock of these for different types of recorders, and then we apply power, 28 volts, not as high power as we've seen this morning, 28 volts to the CVR, what's that? And yeah, that's one, and then we can then get the data off as we would like a normal recorder, and that's just a plot from our report of the parameters just leading up to the accident. I think that's maybe 60 seconds. If you can read it, the top is airspeed, so you can see the decrease in airspeed. I think this area here is a retardant drop, number 2. The other one's a bit previous, and you can see, I mean, I'm not trying to show you this accident too much, but he did bring the thrust levers up here to try and climb out of that valley, and this is the corresponding engine speeds, both engines. So we can see from this both engines were working okay, both coming up at the same speed. Computed airspeed, obviously altitude. We're looking at radio altitude. The red line is the altitude above the ground. But that's the sort of thing we're trying to get off a flight data record. That's the typical plot we'll put in our reports. And then we can produce an animation of that and put all the instruments on, feed from the FDR, have a map. This one recorded latitude and longitude, and so we know exactly where it is in the world. All the thrust levers, the engine instruments, and time, of course, and we also overlay the cockpit voice recorder on that. All right, so that's enough of the flight recorders. Happy to answer any questions about it afterwards, but that's mainly what I deal with. But back in 2017, I was involved as the investigator in charge of this accident, Sydney Seaplanes, we call it. And but before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the families of the pilot and 5 passengers that were involved in this accident who perished, and recognise their grief and pain and the support they provided to the investigation despite this. So just keep in mind, even though this is a technical presentation, there were people involved, obviously, who suffer and people who still suffer from this. But the aircraft involved was a fairly old aircraft, de Havilland DHC-2 it's called, or a Beaver aircraft is its sort of nickname. You've probably seen them on Sydney Harbour. You probably see them actually out of the window here at Shangri-La. They still fly around. 1963, very reliable aircraft. That's why they're still going. Manufactured in Canada, and it can carry 1 pilot and 6 passengers. Fairly big actually. Doesn't look as big on that picture. 2 at the front, 3 passengers in the middle and 2 in the rear, and equipped with floats, of course. But it's got a big radial engine, a It's called a Pratt & Whitney Wasp Junior, and it's a 9-cylinder radial engine. So this happened on New Year's Eve, 2017. So I'm going to go through this afternoon, time remaining, the events of that afternoon and how we worked together in the first week with the New South Wales Police Marine Area Command in the Hawkesbury River, the different reports we put out about this accident, and that we weren't sure why it happened to start off with, and then a breakthrough later on in the investigation during COVID, and a final push to find the answer, and then I'll just discuss the final report coronial. So hopefully we'll squeeze that all in 25 minutes.
6 people are feared dead after a seaplane crashed into the Hawkesbury River north of Sydney. The group had enjoyed lunch at a restaurant and were on their way back to the city when disaster struck.
One of the most beautiful sights in the country, the scene of a heartbreaking tragedy. The Hawkesbury River north of Sydney at 3:15 this afternoon, a seaplane with 6 on board, believed to have lost control, possibly clipping trees, before plunging into the narrow stretch of water and submerging.
There was a heap of boats, the helicopters came around and they were hovering around.
Several boats were quickly on the scene, followed by police vessels, ambulance, marine rescue and the Westpac chopper. The oil slick, the only signs of where the troubled plane went in. It happened at Jerusalem Bay near Cowan, about 30 kilometres north of Sydney.
From certainly the 000 calls we've received and the calls from other people around the bay, they can see a plane. The plane is under the water, but they can't see any people at this stage.
Sydney Seaplanes had been operating for 80 years, a favourite of the rich and famous. In June, Pippa Middleton and her new husband, James Matthews, took the trip. The popular service, also enjoyed by pop stars Ed Sheeran and Sam Smith. A Joy flight costs around $300, many using the service to fly to the famous Barara Waters Inn. This crash will not only be one of the worst in New South Wales, but Australian history.
So a pretty bad accident, very bad accident. Any fatalities bad. But also in the middle of Sydney, or close to the middle of Sydney, New Year's Eve, quite a public profile accident. The aircraft, as you saw on that, hit the water, and there was quite a lot of people around. It was New Year's Eve, a lot of people boating on the Hawkesbury River. And lots of first responders were very brave, dived in the water, tried to get to the aircraft. It turned turtle almost immediately. These are photos taken very shortly afterwards. There's people on jet skis, people diving in, no sign of life. But the aircraft sunk within 7 minutes. But someone managed to tie a buoy onto the wreckage, which was good because it's tidal river. And so from the first impact, it did move a fair bit. But fortunately, for a number of reasons, with someone tying a buoy to it, the police divers could retrieve the bodies very quickly. Otherwise, it could have been a bit of a long, drawn-out process. But they managed. The aircraft crashed at 3:15. By nightfall, all the occupants are out of the aircraft. So this is Cottage Point, a restaurant. Some of you may have been there. A restaurant on the Hawkesbury River, and where they fly out of Rose Bay. In this case, around about midday or 11:30 for a lunch at midday. Stay there for 3 hours and then fly out at 3 o'clock after a nice lunch and a few drinks. So the seaplanes pull up on that buoy there. So I thought I had a map on this, but it doesn't matter. So when the aircraft departs Cottage Point to return to Rose Bay, the aircraft is meant to turn right, and I should have an overview map coming up shortly. The aircraft is meant to turn right where the green arrow points and head out, because it can't climb above the surrounding terrain. It's got to wait till it's higher than the terrain before it turns right and heads back to Sydney. In this case, the aircraft turned left into a bay called Jerusalem Bay, which is a dead end, low hills, effectively somewhere where the aircraft can't climb out. This is looking into Jerusalem Bay, the location of the accident, and as I described, it's sort of narrowing and not enough room down the end, or at that point at least, not really enough room for the aircraft to turn around. Did I skip one then? Okay, that's shortly after the accident, I think taken from the helicopter. And that area, Pinta Bay, was where a lot of the first responders were mooring their aircraft. It's right in the middle of the river, or bay. So when we first got to the site, we had to work out, we'd never been to this place before, we were with the police trying to work out how we're going to get this aircraft off the bottom of the bay. It was 14 metres deep, so not too deep, deep enough for divers to be able to tie support around there. And we had to organise a barge that could fit everything. And that's near the end where we're lifting up the main fuselage, which is quite, this particular point is quite a dangerous point in the operation of lifting, because if you don't rest there, you lift full of water and it's very heavy, and that's when you're likely to see it go back in. Very embarrassing. It would have been very embarrassing because it was being filmed live in between the cricket, I think, by a drone. So that's the aircraft coming out of the water. You can see the radial engine there, and we had to truck it across Sydney to Bankstown. Oops. Where have I got to there? Okay. So we trucked it across Sydney after midnight because we had to get across the bridge, I think, or there were some height limitations, and we got it in a hangar in Bankstown, and one of the wings had been separated in first impact, so we had to, when we were doing the recovery, we got them at that point. On the previous photo, we got the main fuselage, but we had to go back and find the other wing shortly afterwards, but fortunately we found it fairly quickly. And you can see some damage of how the aircraft went in. There was a few eyewitnesses, but we had no radar information to indicate what was happening there. Looking at it in the hangar, we couldn't find any problems with the controls, and nothing mechanically or structural wrong with the aircraft prior to the collision. It was all there. The engine tear down confirmed that it was producing power at the time of impact, which collaborated with witness statements which stated the engine was running loudly and the aircraft came down Jerusalem Bay on the south bank and did a sharp turn to the right and then nosedived straight into the water. So for all intents and purposes, and you can see the main fuselage in the background, we kept that upside down because that's how it came out of the river. But that was, well, it was the best way to do it for safety, but it was a bit hard getting your orientation all the while, whether you're up, down, or left or right. So our first report we put out on the 31st of January, we try and put them out within 30 days of an accident, is a factual preliminary report. And you can see this is probably Sydney Morning Herald or something like that, with the family that were in that aircraft and the Canadian pilot. We'd interviewed a few witnesses and we had different reports. The people in Pinta Bay had said, oh, the aircraft turned left and just turned straight off of Cowan Creek and down Jerusalem Bay. But we had a few people saying, oh no, it actually turned right where it was meant to go and turned back. So we put out our basic info without saying anything about that, and this is what the papers produced, which was actually wrong. But it alerted people because we called for people who were other witnesses, and it actually brought in a few witnesses who actually had photos of it going the other direction, so that was good. But one of the things that was in the aircraft was a camera. We knew one of the passengers, one of the boys, had a big camera, and that it was tourists from England, probably taking photos. It could give us a bit of a clue, because as I said, no radar data, eyewitnesses with different versions. So, but that was in the mud of the river, and this was on the roof of the aircraft when it was upside down, of course. So it had a 32 gigabyte CF card, and that's it when we pulled it out. We were a bit hopeful that we might be able to read that, but we weren't able to read it. So what we did is something similar to what we do with flight recorders, and that's transplant the memory chips or the memory on the compact flash card onto another similar one. Took a bit of a search to find one of the same vintage. With the controller, you see that top picture shows one side, 2 memory chips and the controller in the middle, and then the bottom one shows the reverse. So 4 chips transplanted. I forget how many BGAs or ball grid arrays there are on there, something in the region of 64 on each chip. So I had the young guys do that. They had better eyesight than me. But they did it successfully, and they were able to find, well, we managed to get every photo off that camera from the holiday that family were having, and it was something in the region of 418, including the ones that had been deleted, and there were 9 photos taken during the flight, and these are them. There was a few taken during the taxi and during the time at Cottage Point and at Rose Bay, which were good to give us some timings and verify various things. But these were the 4 photos taken during the flight. So then, I think this is probably a good recreation of those photos. We actually got the police helicopter, or the police did it, we did it on their own, but they got the police helicopter up there and recreated these photos with a similar camera to sort of figure out where they were. So they're the first 2 photos. They're heading up Cowan Creek, and this is the normal route they're meant to go. They're meant to turn right. And then that one, and of course, we had the police helicopter do this, as I say, but afterwards we used some software, some movie making software called Synthise, where you look at the photo, and if you can identify geographical points that long, it will tell us what altitude you're at with 3 points. You triangulate it back. So that's how we got the altitude out of that, because we haven't got a flight recorder. So the aircraft's heading the right way, climbing. It's now up to 134 feet. We deal in Imperial in aviation. And then it started to do a turn. This is what we'd heard from witnesses. And that was the last photo taken. And this is what the witnesses saw. Okay, fast forward that was. So that's what we've got. We've got something strange has happened. He's turned the way he was meant to go. Very experienced pilot. And years of experience on these seaplanes. Knew Sydney very well. And all the pilots from Sydney seaplanes knew Jerusalem Bay was a no-go area. That's you don't go in there, you can't get out of there, you can't climb out of there. But a couple of other things, he did have plenty of room at the beginning of Jerusalem Bay if there was something wrong to do a U-turn. But he didn't. He did that steep turn there, which stalled the aircraft. The other thing is he had 2 big floats on the bottom of his aircraft if something was wrong. Why didn't he land if there was an engine problem, a passenger issue, what have you? And the other thing was puzzling us, why did those photos stop? Why did the photos stop there? What happened? So there's no onboard recording devices, of course. So we made recommendations to have recording devices fitted to these aircraft, but for this type of aircraft, charter operations, passengers paying money, expected to get home, expecting to have a good experience. We went down the path of incapacitation of the pilot, and we looked at his ECGs, his pilot medicals, went to a cardiologist, looked at the autopsy report, everything. We couldn't really find anything. We didn't have an answer. So in mid-2019, after doing all that, we drafted a report and we said this circumstances regarding the accident were unexpected given the nature of the operations and the pilot's experience. In the absence of other reasonable scenarios to explain the above events, the most plausible reason was the pilot experienced some level of incapacitation during or after the turn. However, without the physical or recorded evidence, we couldn't be conclusive about that. So if you were the next of kin, you probably wouldn't be very happy with that, and they weren't. So these are the unexpected circumstances. It didn't continue to climb. It did that 270-degree turn. The photos stopped, entered a known confined area, and there's no need to operate in Jerusalem Bay, no scenic, well, we didn't think there was any dollar incentive to do it, no attempt to land, and something I didn't mention was one of the passengers' seatbelt was found undone with an O missing, and that's puzzled us as well. So I think you saw the picture as a family, a father he was quite a what would you say, a famous and rich figure from the UK, a CEO of a catering company, and he was in the second row, and his seatbelt was undone. The person who had the best view of the pilot, his seatbelt was undone. We could see that from the damage to the seats and also from his autopsy. So actually, when we did that draft report, at the same time as I did that draft report, we said, let's look at that autopsy report again. Did we get carbon monoxide toxicology in it? And it's quite a lengthy report and it wasn't highlighted. I checked through it because we had a doctor on board the team, and I said, I don't think it is. So I rang up the pathologist who did the autopsy, and they said, oh no, we didn't. We only do it if there was a fire on board, which there wasn't in this case. But she said, the good news is we can still do it. We've still got samples from the occupants that we can still perform tests on. So I put in a request, and these are the results we got out. The pilot in the front left seat had 11% carbon. I haven't had to set it for a while. I won't try. COHB, and the father, the one with the seatbelt undone, who was 58, non-smoker, he had 9%, and the daughter, who was 11 years old, she had 10%. Now that's quite significant. The others had 4%, bit varied, but still that's a high amount. If you know carbon monoxide, you should really only have about 0.5. Unless you're a smoker, you might have a little bit more, 2 to 3%. So 2 years stable. Because this was just about 2 years afterwards that we got the blood tested, and these are the symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, between 5 and 20%, which we've got in those people, but especially the pilot. Cognitive changes, visual and auditory sensory effects, so decreased visual tracking, vigilance and perception, problems with performance of fine and and sensory motor performance, cognitive effects. So performance in flying an aircraft is definitely one of those. And so we're in the area there where we think this could answer the question. And with the father's seatbelt being undone, to sort of tease up there and turning back, not landing, all those things. So it's the beginning of COVID, so we decided, fortunately, that the wreckage was in a hangar down in Helensburgh, or in a container, sorry, being kept. And we went in there and examined the exhaust assemblies to try and find the source of carbon monoxide. And examine the firewall for how the carbon monoxide would have got through from the engine bay into the cabin. And we had to do a fair bit of work on validating those toxicology tests for their accuracy and validity. We got the autopsy report updated to highlight the elevated CO levels, and then we got second opinion knowing we'd be questioned about this. And also we decided to go down to Maruya with an exemplar Beaver aircraft and do a test with an exhaust leak to see, except I've missed one thing. Oh yes, okay. So examining the exhaust, first thing, we found a crack there, a pre-existing crack. You can see the soot there on that crack. The picture at the bottom is the original exhaust. I forget what cylinder it was, but close to the cylinder head, and the soot from the existing crack. So we could see that exhaust leak had occurred before the accident, and we sectioned it. The exhaust was not in very good nick, with a few cracks, but some of them we're not so sure would they happen during the accident, but that one definitely was there before. When we examine the firewall, there's two access panels from the engine bay into the cockpit, or vice versa, from the cockpit into the engine bay to change the magnetos on the back of the engine. They're magneto access panels. There was 3 bolts missing. Very small, but there was an access path for the CO into the cabin through those bolts. Bad maintenance, you'll see there, the bolt on the left, that's the example bolt prescribed for those panels, and the 5 bolts that were in there, that's what they look like. All non-standard with a wing nut on, different thread sizes. No wonder the other 3 fell out, came out. We went back and looked at, because they had a carbon monoxide detector in the aircraft, a cardboard chemical one, not very effective. And we went back and looked at videos from previous passengers to see what that said, and that's what it looked like, the picture on the left during the flight. The CO detector is meant to turn black when CO is detected. Obviously it was beige. Now that's a sign of weathering on it when it's out in the sun. They're meant to last about 12 months. They last about 2 weeks. Very poor, apart from the fact they don't give you an audible and visual alarm. Only the colour change. And we went back and looked at the fact that the pilot had taxied before he picked up these passengers, because there was a change of aircraft, and he taxied for 27 minutes in this carbon monoxide atmosphere. And he had the door ajar because it's quite a hot day. And we thought, did that have an effect on him? Like the passengers had only been in the aircraft like 7 minutes or maybe a little bit longer. But he'd been in it for 27 minutes and the previous flight, taxiing at idle in a carbon monoxide rich environment. So we went and did the testing, as I say, and that's the setup we got there. We got exhaust going into the engine bay. We had the panels on, the panels off, and saw the difference, cracked the door, and there was significant increase in carbon monoxide. We had to abandon the test because we would have got carbon monoxide poisoning ourselves, but set the detectors off. Good proof. We had the CEO of Sydney Seaplanes with us because we borrowed his aircraft. He was amazed. Wasn't very happy because the aircraft that we tested on, we found a bolt missing. So he was not happy. He sacked the maintenance organisation. We produced 2 safety advisory notices about exhaust cracks. This was before we produced the report, and we promote carbon monoxide detectors, but the audible ones are active ones, audible and visual, and lots of, we've got feedback that lots of people are putting them in and they're working, and which is good. It's sort of forgotten, invisible but deadly gas, which relates to you guys in mining areas too. Very, very quickly affects you, and it's insidious, you don't know. So we've recommended fitment of onboard recording devices, fitment of alarms, and we went on about use of non-standard bolts in access panels.
There's finally an end today to a case that has shocked and saddened Sydney for years.
The pilot and passengers were exposed to carbon monoxide.
They re-examined the plane and they found a pre-existing crack in the exhaust collector ring.
And missing bolts allowed the fumes to leak into the cabin.
Had there been an alert to the presence of carbon monoxide, the pilot would have been able to take measures to reduce the risk.
The Transport Safety Bureau says the best way to detect carbon monoxide in the cabin is through
a $100 electronic active carbon monoxide detector could still have prevented the disaster.
This ATSB investigation has been so thorough and it makes sense now.
I like that. Had to put it in. Okay, so I'll just finish off here. I didn't pay him either. So that's what I ran through, all of that. We had a coronial in October 2022, 2 weeks. The ATSB final report had to be in the stand for 4 days, and the coroner agreed with us, the maintenance organisation. We're just, anyway, I'll leave it at that. All right, if you do want to read the full report, you can QR code that, and that's got the full report, but you've seen it, you've seen the video, so thank you.